Hello and welcome to the Raw podcast brought to you by the Sunderland Echo. I'm your host for today, Joe Nicholson, and I'm joined by my colleague Phil Smith. We're going to be reflecting on Sunderland's 3-1 win over Blackburn at Ewood Park. It's a result which means Tony Mowbray's side have now won 3 league games in a row to move up to 4th in the table. Jack Clarke scored twice, which means he's now scored 5 goals this season, while Dan Neil's strike on the stroke of half-time helped Sunderland retake the lead after Harry Leonard's equaliser. Phil, we were both at the game last night. I think it's fair to say that Sunderland did ride their luck at times, particularly in that first half. So what were your kind of reflections on the match coming away from Ewood Park?
Yeah, I thought, kind of as you've alluded to there, the starting point was being incredibly impressed with Blackburn, really, in terms of, I suppose, some similarities with Sunderland, really. A very young side, very, very dynamic, really impressive in the movement and the way they moved the ball. And I think that Sunderland probably just weren't quite at it to begin with. And I suppose there were a lot of luck allowed them to stay in the game, and also some excellent last-ditch defending as well. And, to be fair, there are two parts of the game, attacking and defending. And when you have players like Ballard, it always gives you a chance. So I thought that Sunderland were very lucky to be in the lead at half-time. The second half, I thought, was a very different game in that Blackburn still looked really dangerous. You still felt like they could score goals, but Sunderland looked just as dangerous, I thought. I thought they looked like a really good counter-attacking side. They won the ball back in some dangerous areas. And really, Blackburn couldn't touch Clarke in that second half. He looked like he was on a different level to anyone else on the pitch, I think. So I think the pleasing thing for Sunderland is that over a period of 4 or 5 days, they've had 2 away games, and they've found different ways to win both games. They've had things go their way at times. They've had a little bit of the luck for sure. But they've won 2 very different games against 2 completely different opponents. I mean, you couldn't find a more stark style between, Gareth Ainsworth's QPR and Yondell Thomason's Blackburn. So to find a way to win both games, I think it reflects the fact that I think there's a maturity about these players now. And yeah, they had to show a bit of resilience. They had to get a bit of luck. But certainly in the second half, they looked like they could score a lot of goals.
Mm. You mentioned Clarke now, as I said before, is now on to 5 already this season. 2 of those from the penalty spot, with 1 coming last night. And as you said, Blackburn really struggled to deal with him. Mowbray was actually saying after the match he wasn't too happy with Clarke in the first half because of his work off the ball defensively. I think Niall Huggins got a little bit exposed on that left-hand side, but his quality in the final third really showed. And I suppose it just shows how important it was for Sunderland to keep him when there were bids coming in from Burnley over the summer, and just what a key player he's going to be this season.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Mowbray has talked about this season is that working on Clarke's positioning in terms of being more aggressive and getting in the box. He is one of those players who likes to hug the touchline, quite often likes to drop deeper and sort of drive in field, which of course is still very effective. But I think something that Mowbray has worked on is getting him to the back post, getting him into more attacking positions. His first goal against Southampton, that little back post header, is obviously a great example of that. And the fact that he's stepping up and taking these penalties shows where his confidence is at. Absolutely crucial player. And I think ultimately this is why the Burnley deal never really made sense for either party in the summer. So we know that if Burnley had put a huge bid on the table that met Sunderland's valuation, Sunderland may well have accepted it, and Clarke may well have gone for talks, and he may well have decided to go to Burnley. But I think ultimately the fee was never at a level that Sunderland felt reflected where Clarke was and where he could get to. And I also think Clarke had the understanding that Clarke's been to a Premier League club where he wasn't really in the team, and it really slowed his development. And I think he understands that being pretty much the main man in a side at the top of the Championship, if he does that for another year, his options are going to be incredibly strong. Whether that's potentially getting a new improved deal at Sunderland, whether it's potentially getting more Premier League interest, but from established teams who want to give him a starting role, that could potentially be on the table for him if he continues this form. So I think what we're seeing at the moment is a reason why that deal was just never quite right, either for the club or for the player. Because I think everyone could see that as much as he's had a brilliant year last year, there was still a little bit more to come from him. And I actually think we're seeing that this year. That second half, there aren't many players better to watch than Clarke, never mind more effective. So difficult to stop, such a huge outlet for his team. I think I think everyone can reflect on that summer decision, that summer interest from Burnley, and feel like the right decision was made. Because I honestly don't think Clarke's really losing out at the moment, because he's playing his way into a position where, there could be bigger clubs than Burnley who are potentially interested in the future, or he could be, let's not rule it out, he could be leading Sunderland to somewhere very, very, very exciting indeed. So really, really, really good to watch. And I suppose it just goes to show as well, there was a lot of noise around Clarke in the summer. I don't think anyone can doubt how committed he is at the moment to this team and this project. He is absolutely loving it. I think he enjoys the responsibility. He enjoys the sort of adulation he's getting from fans. And it's a real pleasure to watch at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you can see that as well, can't you, in his kind of goal celebrations, particularly the one against Southampton a couple of weeks ago. And then he spoke very well yesterday after the game in his club interview. I don't think there were too many complaints when he went down for the penalty from the Blackburn player. He kind of got there first and then got kind of wiped out, I think, by the Blackburn player. But Mowbray was frustrated by the Blackburn equaliser, which came shortly after Clarke's goal. There were kind of some appeals that maybe the ball went out of play, and then maybe some appeals that it was offside, and he was booked as well after that. So what did he kind of have to say about why he was frustrated about the equalising goal?
Yeah, well, I think his frustration was that the linesman wasn't in line with the cross. So that, which is true. We had a good angle to see it. We could see the linesman was a good 10 yards behind where the cross was actually played for. So Mowbray's frustration was that he was in absolutely no position to make a judgment on whether he was offside or not. I mean, by the sounds of it, it looks like Huggins was actually playing Leonard on. So it's hard to be particularly critical, because I think the right decision was made. Now, when Mowbray spoke, he hadn't seen that decision, so he didn't know for sure whether he was onside or not. But yeah, his frustration, I think, was ultimately that the linesman wasn't really in the right position. I think it was one of those frustrating goals as well, because obviously Sunderland were down at 10 at the time, weren't they? Dan Ballard had taken a knock when he challenged the keeper. But unfortunately, those are the new rules. They're crystal clear. Everyone understands that if you get treatment on the pitch, you have to wait 30 seconds at least to rejoin the play. That was obviously a tough one for Sunderland to take, but that'll be the same if an opposition player gets injured, and we've already seen that at times this year. So I think the other aspect of that, it was really hard to argue that Blackburn didn't deserve a goal. They definitely benefited from the fact that Ballard was off the pitch, but I mean, they created some big chances in that first half. But I'm sure Ballard will be claiming he's still got a clean sheet, because technically he was on the sideline when Leonard scored.
Yeah, he was excellent last night, wasn't he, Ballard? There was one block in particular when the game was 0-0, and he threw himself to block the ball on the line, then give a big fist pump to the away fans. But Sunderland getting that crucial goal on the stroke of half time. It's the second game now that they've scored right before the break, with Dan Neil converting after Pritchard's corner was kind of half cleared, and then a very good finish from Neil. And Clarke and Mowbray admitted after the game that Sunderland didn't quite get that press quite right in the first half. And as you say, Blackburn probably deserved their equaliser at least, and were unfortunate to be going in 2-1 down at half time. But it was a crucial time again to score, like the game at QPR on Saturday, wasn't it? Getting it right before half time.
Yeah, it was a huge moment in the game. And I think that it was a really good finish from Neil. I think you could actually see, I know it sounds a little bit simplistic to say when a player is sort of injured that it makes a big difference, but I thought you could see that Echo was a miss in the first half. I think you saw Blackburn playing through Sunderland's midfield quite easily. I actually thought that Job was excellent in the second half. I think that, and it's totally understandable when you've got, a 17-year-old playing a different role to what he's been doing so far this season. It's going to take a little bit of time. I thought both Neil and Job were excellent in the second half. I thought they were much more physical. Yes, there were times when Blackburn played through them and created chances, but they're a good side at home chasing the game, so you expect that. But actually, so many of Sunderland's best chances in the second half came from either Neil or Job winning the ball back quite high up the pitch. And that totally changed the dynamic of the game. And I think that, Mowbray said his instructions were pretty simple at half time. There wasn't anything overly tactical about it. It was just about lifting that intensity, getting tighter to Blackburn's midfield, making some more challenges. But having that lead that you mentioned that they got just before half time was so important, because they could afford to let Blackburn try and force the issue, knowing that they had Clarke, knowing that they had Barr, knowing that Roberts would be able to come off the bench. They knew they were going to be able to play that kind of counter-attacking strategy. And you see that with the third goal, right? Blackburn play a really risky pass into midfield that Neil pounces on. and all of a sudden Sunderland have a huge overload and they're able to counter. So I think that goal was so important in terms of that goal on the stroke of half time was so important in terms of just settling Sunderland a little bit, but it also put them in the ideal scenario for how they wanted to play that second half, which was to kind of invite those risky passes from Blackburn into break. And obviously that was a huge part, as we've discussed, Clarke's brilliant second half performance. The platform was winning the ball back in midfield so they could feed him in space. And obviously from there, he did the rest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you mentioned there, Ekwah wasn't playing last night. There was one change last night to the starting 11 from the QPR game with Ekwah coming out. Alex Pritchard came into the number 10 position, and then that meant Joe Bellingham dropped a bit further back. But looking ahead on that, Phil, Clarke obviously then with the third goal, it kind of just showed that Sunderland took their chances on the night, and that proved crucial in the end.
Yeah, I think it was a clinical performance, I think. And I think it goes back to a little bit of what I said before about Clarke in terms of really honing in on that end product, getting into those really dangerous positions, attacking the goal a little bit more, being a little bit more direct in his running. I mean, it's a really seriously high quality finish, isn't it? It's so easy to sort of snatch at that or take the shot early or just fire it into a block, but to have the composure to wait and to take it past those defenders was a brilliant moment, really. And I think that is a big part of where Sunderland are at. I think most of the games this season, they've probably been the better side, or they've had a good level of control. But even when they're not, they've got such attacking quality in the final third that they always have a chance in games. And Clarke winning the penalty in the first half, even though his team were playing pretty poorly, kind of sums that up. And I think that's what's quite exciting at the moment, because Bursto's only going to get better as he acclimatises. I think Al-Shish has looked seriously talented both of the last two games. He's come off the bench. Rusyn obviously hasn't made his debut yet. Pembele hasn't made his debut yet. Mienda hasn't made his debut yet. He got Dak to throw into the picture. So while I think, especially if you look towards next month in October, there are some really, really tricky fixtures. And I don't think anybody expects Sunderland to keep getting, 4 wins from 5 and go unbeaten. But there is actually, I think you can hope that, when Ekwah's fit, when Sirkin or Release is back fit, they can actually get stronger in terms of their squad. And that's a really exciting place to be, because the quality in the final third already is pretty strong.
You mentioned Bursto there. He made his second appearance after making his debut against QPR. He got around 64 minutes again when he was replaced by Patrick Roberts. And Mowbray's spoken about this, hasn't he, pre-match and post-match, that the team have kind of got used to playing without that centre forward, that he expects the centre forward to drop deep and link up play. So it is probably going to take a bit of time for Bursto to settle in. But what have you made from what you've seen of him and kind of his potential in this side?
Yeah, I think he's got some really good attributes that are quite exciting. He's quick. You can see that he's quicker than the defenders he's coming up against. What we haven't quite seen yet is he's not quite on the wavelength with his teammates where he's ready to really exploit that. So a couple of times where he almost got off the shoulder, but the pass was just a little bit short, or the first touch wasn't quite there. But he's clearly got pace that is going to really help Sunderland. And there was one moment in the game as well where he showed a brilliant touch and then played a big first-time switch out of bar, which completely opened up the game. So I think we're seeing that he's got technical quality, and we're seeing that he's got pace. And I think even in the second half last night, I know he came off, but you can see that already in 2 games, he's getting a little bit better at using his body. He's becoming a little bit more used to grappling with the defenders, which he probably hasn't had to do too much of in under-21s football. So I think there's some really encouraging signs there. But I think, what you say is absolutely right. This is a team that's developed to expect the striker to come really deep, to play little 1-2s, to really contribute to the build-up, as we saw Gellart do. He was probably the best example of that. Bursto, to me, looks like he wants to be a little bit more direct. He wants to stretch the play a bit more and run off the shoulder. So I guess it'll be a 2-way process, really, of him adjusting to the players behind him, but also the players behind him adjusting to knowing that option's there. We haven't seen Pritchard play those balls over the top or through the middle because there's been no one there to kind of meet it so far. So I think there's going to be a bit of an acclimatizing process. And there'll definitely be times, I think, when Mowbray goes with no striker, and he plays a Dak off the front or somebody like that. I think he'll definitely do that on occasions. But I'm quite excited about Bursto. I've been quietly encouraged. by what we're seeing from him. And like I say, the big thing is he's got a lot of pace, and that's something that we haven't really seen Sunderland have in the final third. So it's nice to see them have that little bit of kind of variety.
We saw that yesterday, didn't he? When Burto came off and Roberts came on, and he was almost the furthest player forward. But you mentioned a few of the players that were missing last night. Ekwa, Dak. We know Sirkin's going to be out for a couple of weeks with a hamstring problem. Rusin's still awaiting his visa documentations. Do we expect any of those players to be back for the weekend against Cardiff on Sunday?
I think it's highly unlikely. I think Mowbray said he was looking at around a week to 10 days for Ekwa. I don't think it's one where you want to take any risks just because of his importance. So I think it's highly unlikely. Dak would have a slightly better chance because I think Mowbray said, we probably could have gambled with him against Blackburn. We just felt that we didn't need to because we had Pritchard. And so I would be surprised if Dak was risked. I think what they'll do is they'll just give him the weekend, let him rest and maybe look at him again next week. But theoretically, he could be involved if someone felt he needed to. Rusin, obviously, they were expecting the visa to arrive on Monday. So that suggests that it's nearly done. And I suppose there's every chance it could have been done since then. But I think he would only be on the bench anyway. Mowbray's been pretty clear that he's not ready to start a game. His English isn't great. So he's kind of finding his feet a little bit. He certainly doesn't have that sort of real understanding of the team and what he needs to do at the moment. Hopefully that's something that will come over time, but I definitely think we'll see him used as an impact substitute first and foremost.
Yeah, I think as well as Sunderland are doing, perhaps we maybe are seeing a bit of a lack of strength and depth, particularly kind of in central midfield with Ekwa's injury. Bellingham's had to drop back there. But in terms of kind of the selection dilemmas for Sunday, perhaps Roberts comes back in. Could you see any other changes to the starting 11 that played at Blackburn?
I think it's hugely unlikely. I think Roberts, it could be a good time to bring him back on Sunday. I think Barr's been a really interesting one because I think he's taken a huge step forward these last few weeks. Last night wasn't his most sort of explosive game. He missed a couple of sort of half chances. But I'm really impressed with how much better his discipline is now. He very, very rarely sort of leaves Hume exposed. He's holding the ball up much better than he did when he first came into the team. So I'm really sort of encouraged by what he's done. But at the same time, he has played 4 games in a row. Particularly this week, 2 away games have been really demanding. It feels to me like it might be a really good opportunity to just say, you've done really well. You've taken a huge step forward, but we're going to bring Roberts back in for this one. I think beyond that, I don't foresee any changes. I don't think you're going to see him take any big risks by changing the midfield. His only other real option would be to bring Chris Rigg in, but I think that's unlikely at this point to start a game. And I think defensively, like I say, with Sirkin out, I don't see any changes. So I think Roberts is probably the obvious one. I think there's a really good chance he starts on Sunday. But otherwise, I think the balance of the side will pretty much be the same.
Well, Sunderland definitely going into the game in good form. 3 wins in a row and up to 4th in the Championship ahead of that game against Cardiff on Sunday. So, Phil, thanks a lot for joining me on the latest episode of the Raw podcast. We'll have more build-up to Sunday's game against Cardiff back at the Stadium of Light with Sunderland back on home turf. We'll, as you say, we can have more build-up to that game over on the SFC section of the Sunderland Echo website. So once again, thanks a lot for listening to the Raw podcast.